Alright, welcome to another tutorial. Today we're going to be taking a look at adding some parameters to our weapon customization system here. So this comes as a request, and we've had a few people ask, how you would go about doing this. We've got our system here that we created in previous videos. We can select through the weapons. I've got a bunch of garbage UI on the screen here, stuff that I've done as little mini examples. We're going to get rid of most of this. And the idea here is to have some properties go along with these things. So things, like how much damage each weapon does and, the rate of fire and that kind of thing. So we're going to build this on top of the system that already exists and kind of move forward from there. And so, yeah, we're going to be doing this. Now, there's a couple of different ways you can do this. The first way is just to go and hard code the numbers in. So when you go and set which weapon mesh you're using, then just go and set a bunch of variables behind that. And I've done this before. It works really well if you have a small number of options. But once you start getting a lot of different options and a lot of different configurations, like we're doing with these weapons here, where they have attachments that may alter the way that the weapon works, you may want to set this up in a way that is a little bit easier to handle and a little bit easier to maintain when you start adding changes and making variations to this in terms of how the system works. Now, in my Mandalorian project, I did use the first version of this, in which everything was hard coded. But we're going to be doing this now with a different method. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to head over into the folder where I'm keeping my blueprints. So I've got this here, and we're going to first go and create a structure. Now, a structure is a kind of like a collection of variables. It's a collection of settings, if you will. And what that's going to do is that's going to kind of hold what it is that we're going to be using. So I'm just going to right-click, go to the blueprints, and choose Structure. We'll go and rename this here, S_, and we'll call it Weapon. Well, we've got a little bit of a problem here. I guess I got my cap lock on. We'll go and kill this. I think Unreal's got a bug here when I renamed this. Yeah, so it's gone and done that. It duplicated the file, and actually I believe the old one doesn't really exist, so we're just going to go and delete that. This one, if I try to use it, it doesn't actually exist either. It's just failed to load assets. So let's just try this again here. So blueprints, struct, S_, and we'll call this weapon data. There we go. Now, what we've got in the struct here is the ability to add a series of variables. So there's already kind of one set up ready to go here. It's a Boolean. That's not what we want. The first one I'm going to do is going to be a string. We're just going to use this for the name of the weapons. So we'll call this weapon name. Okay. And then we'll go and add a new variable to this as well. So we can use this one to classify, Colt and shotgun and whatever other kind of weapon that you want. You can actually use this to select your mesh down the road if you want as well too. You can see we've got a default variable down here at the bottom. This is where you can go and put in, and we'll do this later on. What is the default option for this? Okay, so our second variable here, we're going to call this rate of fire. And this is going to be used to determine how quickly the weapons can fire their bullets. So this is going to be a float. We'll do this as a rounds per minute kind of thing. Our next variable we'll call reload speed, and that too can be a float. We can do this one in seconds. And let's just add one third one here. I'm only going to do 4 of these things here. But you can add as many of these as you want with all the different parameters and properties that you want. So our last one here we'll call damage, and we'll just let these weapons do different levels of damage. So with that done, all we need to do now is just go and save this sucker out. And then these parameters are going to get used. Now, they're this doesn't mean these are going to work in the weapon out of the gate. This is just storing that information so that when we set up the blueprint for the weapon to fire, these variables, these values can be used to plug in there. Now, the other thing that we're going to do is we are going to populate this data from somewhere outside of Unreal. And this is one of the really neat things about this system, is that it gives us the ability to kind of edit this in a really quick way. So there's our struct, and then what we're going to do is we're going to go and create a new file. So I'm going to go into my Explorer here, I'm going to go new, and I'm going to create an Excel sheet. Okay, so this is just a cell-based list. And so I'm going to call this weapon data, and then we'll go and open this up here. It opened up on my other monitor. And I'm going to use column A as my enumeration. So we have 3 weapons, so I'm going to call them 0, 1, and 2. Now the reason I do this, you can see that there is an enumerator beside it. And that starts at 1, but since when we use an array inside of Unreal, it starts with 0, I tend to like to create an enumeration table as well inside of here. So now we're just going to go and recreate the variables from our struct. So we've got our weapon name, we've got our rate of fire, we've got our reload speed, and we've got our damage. Now these don't have to be in the same order, but it's a little easier to track them and keep an eye on them here if you do that. And so now what we're going to do is we're just going to populate the data. So my first weapon was the Colt, my second one was the MP5, and then finally I've got my flintlock here at the bottom. Okay, now we're going to use rate of fire. I went and looked this up on Wikipedia. I'm not going to be using crazy accurate numbers here, but just kind of close enough. So we're going to use 180 rounds per minute in the Colt. We're going to use, I think, let's say 800 here for the MP5. And in the flintlock, which is a really big old slow weapon, let's go and give this maybe 1 round per minute. Now let's go take a look at the reload speed. I imagine that that Colt can be ejected and have a new magazine put in pretty quick, so we'll do 1 second. We'll double that for the MP5, and then for the flintlock, you know, powder, ball, and packing and all that stuff. This is going to have a much slower reload speed, so we'll put 8 seconds in there. Finally, the damage. Now, the funny thing is the Colt and the MP5 do the same damage. The difference here is going to be how many bullets per minute actually fire. They both use the same ammunition, so we'll put the same damage in there. And then, yeah, that'll just get multiplied against the rate of fire. So you'll do the same damage, just a lot slower with the Colt and a lot faster with the MP5. And then our flintlock, let's make this a big mambo jumbo here. Let's do there. There we go. Okay, nice. Lots of damage. So now what I'm going to do is I need to bring this file. This is an XLSX, an Excel sheet. And in order to bring this into Unreal, we actually need it to be saved as a separate or a different kind of file. That other kind of file, I'm going to go to Save As, and we're going to switch this from an XLSX down into a CSV. Now, a CSV is a comma-separated value. And so it's going to put our values just separated by commas, and that's what Unreal is going to read. So we're going to save that. And now this part is actually rather important. So I've got my file there. You can see it. It's in the Explorer here. But it's rather important we close the Excel sheet. If you leave the Excel sheet open, Unreal won't be able to import it. So now we just drag this into Unreal, and here it is. It recognizes this as being a data table. So that's brilliant. That's what we want. We can choose our data table type. Now, because we already made our struct and it's in our system, we'll find our struct down here, S-weapon data. So that was the purpose of creating that struct, is that it tells us file when we import it what kind of data we're dealing with here. I'm going to ignore the extra fields and ignore the missing fields, and then we'll just import this as is. So there it is there. There's our, and you can see our data has been populated from the Excel sheet, and it lives inside of this data table. So there's our our enumeration 0, 1, 2. We've got our names, Colt MP5, Flintlock, and then all of the data that we assign to it. So the nice thing about this is any updating you want to do, all you got to do is edit that CSV file and re-import it. Okay. The next thing we're going to need to do is edit the weapon blueprint here. So I'm just going to go and select it in my scene. I'll have to go in here, and we're going to go open this blueprint. And here is the blueprint as we left it before. So over here at the end here, we're setting our weapon properties. This is a function I created. And if we go in here, this is where it's using the enumeration to go and take a look at which variable is being chosen and which weapon is going to be assigned. And so, yeah, so if we have 0 as the value, it's going to plug in the Colt, and then we're switching in the icon here as well. Now, I also have a variable here, weapon numbers. I'd originally created this for another purpose. If you don't have this, go and create this. This is just an integer variable. And what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to use this for the system we're going to create now. So I'm going to drag this in here, and we are going to set this variable. And all I'm going to do is, based off which weapon gets selected, we're going to go and just change this variable. So we've got 3 of these things here. We've got the Colt, we've got the MP5, and we've got the Flintlock. And so I'm just going to go and immediately after setting the icon image for each of these weapons, we'll go and change values. So the 0 for the Colt is fine. Next we have the MP5. This has to be the same order. So I'm using my enumerator here. It's just called row name. But it's the enumerator that we're using here that we created in that Excel sheet. Again, starting with 0. So we're going to ignore the actual counting inside the data table. Yeah, because it's going to start with 1, and we don't want this to work the same way. So let's go back here. So 0 is going to be the Colt, 1 will be the MP5, and 2 will be our Flintlock. So I can go and save this now, and we'll go back to our event graph. And now when we set our weapon mesh, it's also going to set that number for us. So we're going to move our dynamic material here over to the end. And we're going to place a new function in here. So let's go create a new function. And this new function is going to be called set weapon parameters. If I can spell, there we go. Set weapon parameters. And this is where we're going to go in and set the variables that we created in our struct. Now, to do this, we need to store those variables somewhere. We need to actually have them somewhere where we can use them. So I'm going to create a variable here. We're still in our weapon blueprint. And this is going to be a reference to the data table. So I'm going to do a search for data table type, and we'll go and select that there. And then we can compile that. And then we only have one of these data tables here in Unreal at the moment, so it's the only one to choose. We'll probably want to give this a better name, so we'll go and call it, let's see, weapon data, like so. Now that's going to contain everything that's in that data table. And we now have that as a parameter inside of, or a variable inside of our blueprint here. So let's pull this out. And that is a reference to that data table. So what we're going to do is we're going to pull out of that data table. And let's go in, we're going to get the data table row, get data, there we go, get data table row names. Okay, so the first thing we want to do when we call this function is get a list of all the names of the data in the rows. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to populate that into an array. So we're going to go promote this to a variable, which is automatically an array. We'll leave the name as is. That's a pretty decent name. And that's going to be now a collection of all the row names of our data table. The next thing we're going to do, we'll pull out from our data table again, and this time we're going to get data table row. So we're going to find out what's in each row. Now we can't plug the array directly in here. We need to find a specific point in the array. So let's go and get a copy of one of the places in the array. And now this is going to use an integer to choose where in the data table it's going to look. So 0 will be the first row, and 1 will be the second, and 2 will be the third. So we'll put a little reroute in here to keep this nice and clean. Now, all we need to do is get a variable that will sub in for this integer, and we already created that. We created that when we did our editing to our set weapons. So what we're going to do is we're going to plug that variable in here. So here we set the variable number, 0 for the Colt, 1 for the MP5, and then we take that variable right here and we're just going to plug it directly into the get. So that's now going to look at, based off which weapon we have selected, that's now going to look at a specific part of that data table based off that selection. So excellent. Now we've got the information available to us. Now, out of here, we have our out row, and I'm actually going to break this open to get the columns. So let's go in, break S weapon data, and there are our columns. So brilliant. We now have our variables exposed to us. And I'll just move the return node. And what we want to do now is we want to save this data somewhere where the game can use it. Now, we haven't gone and created this yet, so let's do that. Let's go into our game mode. I'm going to go and drag this up here. So here in the game mode, this is where we're going to store variables that we kind of want to use throughout the gameplay. So I've got a bunch of them here already, stuff that we've used already, and I'm going to create one for each of the columns that we made in the data table. Okay, so weapon name, rate of fire, reload speed, and damage. Those are what we need. So the first one, let's do our data first here, our floats first. So we've got our rate of fire, we've got our reload speed, and we've got our damage. Go type these names in here. And then we'll go and make these visible here. It's not really going to matter for what we're doing, but in case you want to go and manipulate these in another way, I'll make those visible. So now that this has been saved, we have access to those. And we go back to our weapon blueprint. Let's get a reference to our game mode. Here it is here. Now, where this comes from, this game mode reference, is back in our event graph. At the very beginning, we're getting the game mode, casting it to our game mode, and then saving that as a variable. This just means we don't have to cast every single time we want to do this, so it makes it a little bit more streamlined. So we pull out from here, and we are going to set variables inside of the game mode. What variables? Well, here's rate of fire. So excellent. After we get the information from the data table, let's throw that information into the variable. I'm going to go and stack these. It's going to make it a little bit cleaner. I'm going to pull down here, and let's go set another variable. Let's set our reload speed. Again, we'll pull out of the rate of fire into the reload speed, plug our reload speed in, and then we're going to do the same thing again. We're going to go and set our damage. We'll plug that in, and we'll go and put this down here, and we'll pull our damage in here. Now that's going to set up the float values that we can go and plug into the weapon system, how the weapon actually works. And those variables are now just going to change depending on what weapon has been selected. And so brilliant. Let's go and add that other variable, our weapon name. I don't know that we're going to use it, but we've got it created, so we might as well go and put that information forward anyway. Because yeah, I think that's going to make a lot of sense in terms of how this works. Now, if I hit play here, you can see I've got a lot of again gobbledygook on my UI. Let's go over to the UI and delete all of this stuff here that was done as other examples. So we'll delete that, this. Click on that. We'll leave that. We'll get rid of the paint job. We'll get rid of the name. Oh, don't delete that. We'll get rid of the naming, and we'll get rid of the icon image here. So we just have our 3 buttons for the weapons now. Just gone and simplified all of the UI. So we're going to add some text boxes over here on the right that are going to get updated from the system. So let's go and create a horizontal box first. This will just make my life a little bit easier. We're going to duplicate this a handful of times. One for the reload speed, one for the damage, and one for the rate of fire. And then we'll go and drag some text in here. So this text is going to tell us what this object is. You know what? Let's go and duplicate. Let's put the name in here as well. So I'm going to go into this text box that I made. This text block here. We're going to go rename it, and we'll name it weapon name. So there we go. That'll show up exactly the way we want it to. We'll grab some text and put it into the others here. I'm just going to nest these in the horizontal box. Now this text, we're going to delete it. We don't want it to say text block, but we're going to go and create a binding. This means it's going to get the information to store in that text from somewhere else. So here, I'm going to grab my game mode again. Out of my game mode, we're just going to go and get the weapon name. Now, we actually haven't created the weapon name yet, so let's do that. New variable, this is going to be a string, and we'll call this weapon name. Weapon name, there we go. So now we've got somewhere to save that information. Let's go back to the UI, and now we'll get weapon name. There it is. Beautiful. And then we're just going to put that into the return node. Now, oh, I've got some errors here because I deleted a bunch of my UI, but not the scripting that goes with the UI. So let's go into the graph, the event graph, and let's delete the things that I've already deleted. There we go. One more. This. We can just break this. Okay. We'll get rid of these things here, which aren't doing anything. Just the two that we've edited here. Okay, so this is going to, and I'm not naming this. Obviously, you know, you want to name this thing to keep it really nice and clean. We're going to go, and I don't have enough room here to write the names of the weapons, so we'll grab that horizontal box and we'll move it over. We're going to size it to content here too. I'm going to move it over just so there's enough room to write the name of the weapon here to the right of it. And then we'll go line these ones up as well. There we go. And now we're just going to rinse and repeat here for each of the properties that I created. So we'll drag some text in. We'll go and rename the text. This is going to be damage. I think is probably a good one to add next. We'll go and nest this inside the damage box. There we are. We'll clear the text and we'll create a new binding. This binding is obviously going to get the damage. So we'll grab our game mode. We're going to get damage. There's our variable. We'll plug that into the return value, compile, and close. Okay, so now that'll work. We'll go and grab some more text for the next one. And we'll call this one, let's say, reload speed. And we'll grab another text box. We'll put that into the same horizontal box. Clear the text, create a binding, game mode, and we'll grab our reload speed. There you are. And again, we'll just plug that into the return. We'll just clean this up a little bit so we don't get any overlap here. There we go. Compile this, go back to the designer. And our final one, which is the rate of fire, let's go and set these things all to match. So we'll plug this in here. This is going to be rate of fire. There we go. Now you don't have to use text boxes when you do this and you set these things up. You can do this as sliders. You can do this as health bars kind of thing, progress bars, so that they fill up and whatnot, so you can actually see, you know, a little bar get filled up the more damage a weapon does. I'm doing it with just numbers because that works to me. We're going to go and plug that weapon name in here. We didn't do this, so I'm going to go and pull out from here. Let's go pull out from here, and we're going to set weapon name. There we go, and we'll plug that directly in there. And we'll just make sure this is wired up and then into the return. Now I've got these stacked here. I do this as a means of organization because this is kind of all one step. It's all doing the same thing. It's setting the variables inside of my game mode. It doesn't have to be set up this way. This is just something personally I do. You can actually go and set these up all horizontally like this, and it'll work just as well. I just find the little spaghetti noodles here. You'd have to add a bunch of reroute nodes in order to clean those up. I just find it a little bit easier to see the stack this way as doing the same thing. So that's why I've got that set up that way. So now if we hit play and we go and check this out, we can see that it says weapon name. There's nothing there. Damage is 0, reload speed is 0, rate of fire is 0. This is because we did not put any default values in yet. Now I'm going to use the default values from the Colt because that is obviously the default weapon that appears here in my system. And if we go and select through this, you're going to see that it doesn't actually work yet. The reason for this is that we haven't actually plugged our function in. So we created our function inside of the weapon blueprint. We're going to make this visible. Those guys are all good. We'll save that. So if we go to the weapon blueprint here, we're inside of our function that we made. Now we made the new function, but back in the event graph, we didn't actually put it in. So it's not being called at any point in time. So let's grab our function, set weapon parameters. We'll drag it out here. And right after we set our weapon properties, we'll set its parameters. And now this should work as designed. So we'll compile. We'll hit play here again. And now, again, our defaults are still incorrect. We haven't fixed that yet. But now you can see as we switch through each of the varying buttons here, all of the information is now being conveyed from our data table into the UI. And again, this is the same data you would push forward into the weapon system itself. Now, we don't have a spacing here or colons or anything like that, so it's a little bit sloppy. And we can go and edit this really, really easy as well. If we go back into the designer here and I go and grab my text, I'm going to grab the weapon name text and we'll just add a colon at the end of that. Same thing with damage and reload speed and rate of fire. So the colon will give us a little bit of separation here. It'll make it a little bit cleaner. So if I hit play again, now you can see there's a colon before the information is provided. So now I can go and click these and you'll see that there's a colon there. So it makes it a little bit easier to read. You might want to put a space in there, make it even easier to read and what have you. The only other thing that we want to do is that default value. So what I'm going to do to set the default values for these things here, you can set them in the blueprint if you want. But you'll notice it doesn't really do much. It's actually, let's go and set them in here. So the default weapon name is going to be Colt. And our rate of fire by default will make 180, I think was what the Colt had. The reload speed, and there we go. So now, nope, that's not right. Oh, we've got to put them in the blueprint. So yeah, I've got them in the data table, but we're not reading the data table until a weapon is selected. So let's go into our game mode, and we'll just set the default values here. So the rate of fire, 180. Our reload speed set to 1. Our damage we'll set to 10. And the weapon name is Colt. Now I'm only setting this because that is by default what's set up here. We could put this in the construction script to read that data out of the gate. But there we go. Now it's got everything that it's supposed to do, and all of that data is cycling through. So there you have it. Now again, we can do this with any number of parameters. I've done it only with 3 here, but you can use this to again populate just about everything, and you can create the exact same system for your attachments as well. So all of these numbers, you can actually start multiplying them together. And whenever you need to make an update, if we go into our CSV file here, let's say we wanted to add another weapon to our game, we can go in here. This is going to be weapon 3. We'll call it shotgun, and then we can go and give it some data as well. Let's see, let's give it this, and we'll give it this, and this is a big mumbo jumbo too, so there we go. And we'll save that. So now, check this out. Now that that's been saved, if I go in here, we'll let that autosave finish, and we'll re-import this. re-importing this, that data is now in here. It's now part of the game. So, provided we had our meshes set up and we had everything else set up, and we had another, again, in our enumeration list here, we had another category here, that would provide us with the mesh for the shotgun, where we could then set our variable to 3, and then everything else would just work. So the system is scalable. It's really, really easy to be able to push these up. Now, you can actually use this system as well to be able to switch the mesh. If you set it up correctly and you get all your names done the way that you want them to, you can use the weapon data, this data table, to swap out the meshes, which is really good. Now, again, while this system is working absolutely brilliantly here and it's doing exactly what you want it to, remember, this isn't actually changing any weapon effect in the game, right? It's not actually changing the rate of fire. It's not actually changing the damage. You still have to plug those variables into your weapon system, which is really, really important. The other thing that's really, really important too is that you realize that the system is not exactly just about weapons. You know, you can use this exact same setup with the enumeration list and your weapon data table here, or your data table rather, to do, you know, the wheels and the spoiler of a car. You know, you can use them to set different properties on a character when you swap out little bits of clothing. You know, it's all about being modular and having those modular bits and pieces do things. That's really where this system comes into its own. Now, I hope this has been helpful, and I hope this is useful for you fine people. I'd love to see what you guys are making with this stuff, and so if you've got something, send it in. And until next time, we'll see you soon.